wanted to make regularly scheduled date and time. So this is recorded, but it's being broadcast as a live stream. That way we can get on Rumble as well. A couple things tonight. We're going to be talking about a few different things, some lessons we can learn from the Great Depression, because going into this year and even beyond this year, it seems like, and we talk about it all the time as preppers, but it seems like some of those are really going to be key points coming up with the way the economy and all that stuff is going. So we're going to be talking about that, as well as I did a poll over at Survivalist Prepper, some people's concerns and all of that. Before we get into all of that stuff, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about how Brian and I have been kind of thinking about how we're going to do the Sunday night shows and then the Blabbercast shows. And I think what we're going to do is start focusing a lot more on the preparedness stuff on Sunday night, and make that more of a, not necessarily just about the basics of prepping and all that, but topics that are centered around preparedness. And then with the Blabbercast, which we do on Wednesday mornings, that is going to be it's going to continue to be the you never know what you're going to get show, right? Is that kind of what you were thinking with all that, Brian?
Yeah, Dale and I were talking about it, and we did the fear porn video here last week. And I was reading the comments. There's a lot of people commenting on that video. If you haven't seen the fear porn video, go watch it. I need to actually go watch the video again. I mean, I haven't seen it, obviously we recorded it.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I need to go check out to see what it said, because there's a lot of really good comments. And one of the things I was thinking about is I had one of my project managers when I was working in Africa. He was an old Delta Force guy, and he liked to say, it doesn't matter who shot John, if John is shot. Like in the process of it, like where did he go? Who is he? It doesn't really matter when you're dealing with the problem, right? So if we look at what's happening in the world and the country, we know we have supply shortages, right? And we could, and what do? Like Dale and I and every other meathead out there, what do we, and probably a lot of you, not saying all of you are meatheads, some of you, but what do we sit down and we start focusing on the why. Look what they're doing, right? So when I look at politics, I don't think anything's going to really change, because it hasn't changed. I mean, we rant and rave about it on the show, right? Yeah. We talk about both parties are just as bad. Both parties have had opportunities to fix things the way they see it, and they really don't, right? Immigration, different stuff like that. So I don't think the whys matter as much. They matter, but if we focus on the why, it gets us all fired up. And that puts us in our emotional mind, for one. And two, we can't turn on anything today, probably for a lot of us, without getting irritated by what's on mainstream media, or like you have to really kind of be deliberate to be on shows that aren't going to irritate you. Like, and coming out of, all the stuff from 2020 and with COVID and lockdowns and riots and just one thing after another, we're all like, like we're all dealing with, like, we've all dealt with enough. Let's get fired up. So we're going to talk more about preparedness from, like, we want to talk about job losses, and how I'm having a podcast. I'm recording actually this afternoon with Pete from the Roaming Preppers YouTube channel, talking about job loss and like, hey, what are the things that you need to do when you lose a job, right? You go in, you get fired, your job gets cut. Like when I lost a job, I didn't know half of this stuff, and I was an exec, right? So it's stuff like that. Let's talk. We want to talk about stuff that is, we know that we have problems. So we want to talk about, okay, and those problems are the symptoms, right, of what's happening in politics, what's happening around the world. Again, the supply shortages, the economies are doing bad. There's inflation, all these different stuff. That's what we're going to focus on Sundays. We're going to try to, and not the why. Yeah. Because that's what we're really dealing with, right? Like if any of us could really affect change, we would have affected change in politics. Our whole premise of our politics, right, is like, we're not affecting any change because we know why. So we're going to focus on that other thing. What were you going to say, Dale?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of that stuff is interesting and important to pay attention to, but ultimately it all comes down to you at home. None of that, like you were talking about, we're not going to change anything. It sucks what they're doing, and there needs to be, they need to be held accountable at some point. But if you look back at throughout history of this country, it's just a cycle over and over again. All this stuff happens. So it's more important that, yes, we pay attention to that stuff. But it's more important that we act on what those situations that could possibly come up. That stuff's the more important stuff. And that's what we want to talk about in Sunday's show. And I think,
and do it without getting like, hey, we all know I can get fired up. Dale has his moments, we can get fired up and all that. And
we will on the Blabbercast.
And we will, and we might even get fired up about preparedness, right? Stuff that, like, when we come here, like, part of the thing back in the day before I don't know, maybe the 2016 election, was a lot of this stuff was talking about preparedness was fun. It's more serious now, but at the same time, if everything's ramped up about the why, that kind of lends itself to be what we were talking about before, was fear porn in a way.
Yeah.
It's maybe a low grade. It's not us sitting up there like, hey, we know the YouTube channels that are out there that do it. But what'd that one guy say? ShamWow, kind of stuff going on. Like, and that, hey, you're going to tomorrow, the end is tomorrow. Right. And every time it's a new video, the end is tomorrow. Well, we all know the end could be tomorrow. Probably won't be tomorrow. So we need to get through tomorrow. So what do we have to do? Deal with the stuff that we can deal with at our level. And so that, try to take that sense of fear necessarily as much as we can. It's preparedness. We're talking about things, and, some of the stuff, how we're going to talk about, obviously gets that, but not without, try to keep it more toned down a little bit, as far as, I don't know, having it a fun place to come from the aspect of, hey, we're not just going there to get all fired up. We're going there to talk about preparedness. If you want to get fired up, come and watch us Wednesday mornings on the Blabbercast.
Well, preparedness inherently, there's an aspect of that fear porn thing built into it, because we are paying attention to all these disaster situations. We're paying attention to all of these different things. So there's that element that's built into it. My problem, and it's sort of like what the mainstream media does. It's a lot of these YouTube channels. I hate to call anybody out by name, but I'm gonna. Canadian Prepper is absolutely just insane with all this stuff. Every day, it's you're gonna die. There's a point where, yes, there's fear porn, but then there is that absolutely we're trying to sell you on something. And that's what the mainstream media does. That's what all these news organizations do. That's what the politicians do. And that's what we do try to avoid anyway. But that's what we're going to, on Sundays, we want to just sort of cut through a lot of that and talk about, this is happening. So what does it mean to you, basically? And what can you do about it? And focus a little bit more on prepping. So,
yeah, there's, let me pull that video up and look at some of these. Oh, here's the comments.
And with that, while he's doing that, with the comments too, if anybody has any comments or any topics, any suggestions or anything like that, you can email us. You can put a comment below one of the videos, and then we'll pull it up on screen, and we'll talk about that and discuss that as far as how it applies to preparedness and all that.
In the comments on that, it's called, the video's doom porn. It's not happening. It's not helping you. That's the thumbnail, the picture you see when it comes up. It says Prepper Potpourri. I can never pronounce that word right.
Prepper Potpourri?
Prepper Potpourri, because why do they got the T in there? Anyhow,
I don't know.
Prepper Potpourri, thanks for watching. She has a great channel. Go check her out. She says, I also hate fear mongering. Fear can paralyze some people instead of motivating them. Just make prepping part of your lifestyle. I agree. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an Alaskan homesteader. Right? That's not what she's saying. It's, you look at things a little bit deliberately when, at times, to see, hey, what's the safest, best option if this goes? Plan for some problems in the future. to the best of your ability. If you're in an apartment, you can only prep as far as you can, and then work on, maybe not being in an apartment, or work on, hey, what's the follow up to me being in an apartment? Do I have a friend I can go stay with and who's into it? Or, what options do I have? Make it that sort of lifestyle. It doesn't mean everything has to be a bunker somewhere. It means you prep to the best of your deal. But, she says, she hates the fear mongering. And I agree. It doesn't have to be. Prepping is about opportunity, right? Like, it's the opportunity not to have. It's the opportunity to have time to react to something that's happening, right? A job loss. Well, if you have food, you can eat your food, right? If you have a little bit of a savings, if you're in the position to have that, you can do that. It should be empowering. Lucky Dame Preparedness, she says, preparedness should not be anxiety inducing. If anything, should help you to feel calmer and more confident, knowing you're ready for what may come, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why that stuff, it does a disservice to preparedness, because, or to people trying to become better prepared, because it induces that anxiety. It makes you feel like that urgency, like you got to get everything done right now, because that's what they want you to do, right? React, get emotional and all that stuff. And it actually does a disservice, because you're not thinking rationally at that point, or as rationally as you should be. And you're not focusing on the things you should. And honestly, I mean, we do it sometimes too, nowhere near that level. But I think it's part of preparedness, because I do get ramped up when I see what some of these idiots are doing. I see how society is, basically just going to crap, and people are kind of molding it that way and turning it that way. So all of that stuff does get me kind of ramped up. But we don't go into the show with the expressed idea of getting people just really fired up. And that's what a lot of these people do. That's what newscasts do and all that stuff. So that's the fear porn crap that I can't stand, is that stuff that it's not necessary. The stuff we talk about, in my opinion anyway, some other people out there watching it may not agree, but in my opinion, is necessary, because it is genuine, it is honest, and it is things that I feel like I need to pay attention to for my preparedness. But flipping out about it doesn't do you any good with all that. So
yeah, well, and I think, I've seen comments where some people say, well, people need to be motivated. Some people have to be motivated that way. I mean, does fear motivate people? Yeah, it motivates you. But I kind of think of using fear as, because that should be your last one. It should be your last resort. You shouldn't have to get there, right? Like, if you think of a way, if you truly get to know somebody, everybody has fears. If you get to know somebody, you can reach out to them, right? There's ways over time that you work on people. And some people, no matter how much, aren't gonna ever get on board with preparedness. And so I think going to the fear thing, it's totally not my thing. Miss Goosens commented on the video. She says, Miss F here, I hate fear mongering as much as others do. However, I've been weeding for a long time now, 61 years old, and the bare bones truth is terrifying enough. I often suffer doom fatigue and have to step back a few days from all of it. Trouble is, what's seen, read, and understood cannot be forgotten once you know what's planned for us all. In my youth, 3 years of oppression would have led to a revolution. Now it seems that all that happens is people take to social media and discuss it.
Yeah.
Let's see what else she is. Before anyone asks if you'd like to bank together and form prepping. Oh, she's saying if you want to look to get in touch with her and talk about prepping and working together and stuff. And, maybe that becomes some sort of little network for you. But, I mean, a lot of what she says is right in there. It's doom fatigue. And I think that's part of what we're talking about too, right? After 3 years of, you can't even just say like, coronavirus, because there's so much else that's been thrown in there over these last 3 years, and I think it gets to part of the fear porn is that's what the politicians and the media are all using right now, right? They're not
Yeah.
motivating you with facts.
They're manipulating you with fear.
It's maybe occasionally, but by and large, they're motivating you with what? Fear. It's all emotional stuff, right? Like how many of the shows on any of the mainstream news channels that people call news, like I just did, are actually considered news shows as opposed to talk shows, right? Because there's a different bar that they have to meet, I think, on that as far as how much opinion they give.
Yeah.
Right. So they're opinion shows because they know it's what are they doing? They're firing you up with their opinion. I mean, Dale and I have talked about it. And I look back at the mistaken thoughts I had of, like Patriot Act, that's probably a good idea. Go after those bad guys. Having full faith and allegiance in the government that I thought would never turn it on me. But that's, okay, it's happened. All right. So how do you protect yourself? I mean, protecting yourself against information loss doesn't just apply because there's a Patriot Act. Maybe you think that's a good thing. It applies to hackers, right? It applies to how you live your life in this digital world we have. So again, I don't think you need the fear mixed in with that. And I think people that are doing the mainstream media and what the politicians are doing, they're trying to keep everybody afraid right now because what do afraid people do? They react. They don't think, right? They're reacting to what they're being told. They're not critically tearing it apart because what do you have? What does fear trigger? It triggers this is part of situational awareness. It triggers a sympathetic nervous system response. Now, maybe it's a little bit of fear, but that little bit of fear takes a perfectly well-balanced thought process, system of thought, and now it gooses it a little bit and injects some energy into their fear energy. Instead of having a well-balanced thought, it now has it has an emotional reaction component of some level to it. And the more fear you get into, the more they dial it up, the more that fear component takes over to the point where people just react out of, oh, this is what the safe thing, or this is the way I should do this. This is how I should do it. That's what's happening around you. And anytime we get in our emotional mind, that becomes part of our thought process. That becomes part of our awareness, situational awareness, how we act, how we decide, right? How we look at the world. So when you run into those YouTube channels and you see that on politics and you see that through the mainstream media, that's what they're going for. They're trying to get everybody to react. Yeah. Right? They don't want us all, because if you're watching this channel, what we believe in that stuff, that like, hey, it's all a bunch of theater. So that's why we're kind of doing this. It's just trying to get people like, let's calm down and let's look at the things that we need to actually do to survive. Because, whether someone kicked the avalanche down the hill with their boot or they triggered it with something else, an explosion, if you're at the bottom of the hill, you need to focus on surviving the avalanche.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what we're focusing on.
And like she said in that comment, there's enough already in all of this stuff that we talk about. So it's not like we're going to cut everything completely out and just strictly, do that stuff, because we do. One, that stuff is interesting. It's stuff that I think needs to be, talked about. But at the same time, the main thing, the most important thing is the preparedness thing is here at home, in your home, wherever. That's the most important thing. And getting all ramped up about that stuff really doesn't do any good, except get you more, pissed off and all of that stuff. So that a couple of
that's
really
why
good comments,
Sunday's show, Dale and I were talking about it, we kind of came away with the idea that they're going to be very similar to our podcasts in tone. Mm-hmm. Right? We don't go Dale's Survivalist Prepper podcast, my Mind for Survival podcast. We don't go crazy. We keep them toned down. We keep our mouths clean. We're going to make that on this show too. Again, that the minute I start drop F-bombs, I do the F-bombing thing because it's what I did in my past when things were real intense. Right. And so as soon as I start doing the F-bombs, and more F-bombs come and I ratchet it up. That ratchets me up. I ratchet you all up. And next thing you know, and I know people I make a spectacle out of myself that is worthy of other people's pointing and laughing at me when I go down those roads. But to try to keep it a bit more mellow and more in line with our podcast, so that way it gives a place to come that's not going to be out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, what I wanted to do is talk about what people are actually afraid of or concerned about right now. And over at Survivalist Prepper, like I said, I did a poll the other day, and I got about 100 responses, a little bit over 100 responses. And I do these from time to time because I'm really curious about taking the pulse of the preparedness community, seeing where everybody is at any given moment. And it usually turns out pretty similar to what this one is right here. And on this poll, and for the people listening to the podcast, I'll read this off so you know what I'm talking about. It is, as we head into 23, what is your biggest prepping concern? Elaborate on a comment below if you need to. And there was a few good comments as well. Somebody talking about shortages were real up where they live. But in this poll, shortages came up at 22%. Inflation in the economy won out at 43%. Civil unrest was at the bottom with 6%. Power grid failures at 17%, and societal decay at 12%. And I knew that, especially given the climate we're in right now, that the economy was going to be number one. And that's been my number one since I started prepping. That was one of the main reasons for starting to prep. But shortages also are up there as well. So what is that kind of, if you were to categorize 5 different things, and there's a couple comments on there too about there needs to be more added to this list, but I can only put 5 on. But is that kind of how you would rate, these types of situations as far as preparedness is concerned?
Yeah, I think it's how you, like, when I look at it, it's how does it kind of overlay with one another, right? Like, I guess you could say the inflation. I look at shortages as being the most impactful on me personally in a way.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I'm sure I've done what everybody else has done is I've cut way back on everything. Like before, I bought something that was like 50 cents more expensive than the other thing. I was like, that's 50 cents. So spend it. Right. But when don't you do that? A couple of times in my life when I've been broke, I don't do that. But seeing how stuff has gone up in price, where it's like, wow, that's a big deal. I've personally cut back. So while I'm feeling the inflation in the economy, and you know what, I'm 50 something years old, and I've managed to eliminate my debt. Right. So I'm in a different boat than a lot of people. But at the same time, what I immediately see offhand is I see the shortages affecting. Like I go to CVS and Walgreens, and try to get medicine, right? Like cold medicine or Motrin or whatever. And people like keep saying, whoa, we got all kinds of, all the whatever version of the coronavirus is going around. We got RSV and the flu, people are coming out of being locked up in their houses for 3 years and they're getting sick. Right. All those germs that everybody didn't have, you're getting. So, people have been sick. I don't know if it's still going on, but, last month it was. So, but I go that was never a problem. It doesn't matter. Like the shelves are literally a third full, like in the stores I'm seeing out here in LA, a quarter full on the medicine aisle. There's some things you're just not going to get. Right. And so the shortages, if you're not prepared, and you don't have that stuff on standby, those shortages, if you need Motrin, well, now you're out of Motrin. Like now you gotta go bum it off somebody. I'm sure Motrin is one of those things a lot of people have, right? But there's other shortages that are coming in there that are slowly impacting life. It reminds me of one of the things I think about, like we're slipping towards an undeveloped nation. When I worked in Africa and was living on the economy, you got what you got when you went to literally the grocery store was built in like 2 40-foot shipping containers. So you got what you got when you went there. It's whatever they had. Like you didn't have too many choices. I see us slipping down to that road.
Yeah.
But I guess it kind of comes back that that's part of the economy in a way. I mean, that all works under the economy. The world economy is kind of crap. So, and then when I look at the other things, what do you have? Civil unrest. Well, why is civil unrest? Obviously, we have the politics, but you throw the economy into there where people are like getting upset and going out because their family, like they can't provide for their family. That's a whole different level of civil unrest. Right. Because like if you watch a lot of people that go out and do stuff, it's a bunch of people that are motivated on a weekend. They go off and do their thing. Right. Whatever. But when you have people that like, hey, I'm out of food for my kids. I mean, baby formula. Like I went to the grocery store after I did my walk this morning, and I'm sitting there, and at the other, like I'm checking out and getting you got to pay for your bag, each bag you get here in California. So people walk out of the store with like all their groceries in their arm. And as I'm getting that, I look across like the other, like at the front wall of the supermarket, and there's the baby formula, which is like maybe 40% full, 30% full. And it's behind lock and key, right? Like you literally have to get a manager to get baby formula. That's the shortages. So that gets into the civil unrest. And then you look at what happens with civil unrest. If Daisy over at the Organic Prepper just had an article out, I saw the email come out about it. I want to say it's like something like 9 power stations have been attacked now.
Yeah.
In the past couple of months. So when you talk about grid failure, every person with an axe to grind right now can go take down, because our power grid's so open and wide exposed, can go take out a substation somewhere. Right. So I guess it does come back to the economy. I guess that's my biggest, because when people are happy, they don't go riot, and they don't necessarily as much, and they don't go tear stuff up. Right.
Yeah. But the economy of everything you just talked about right there, it all ties back into all of that. As this stuff goes on, the thing I'm concerned about mainly, and the power grid doesn't, because of preparedness and because I'm preparing for a bunch of different things, I've got the whole alternative power thing pretty set up. So that isn't huge on my radar. But when you look at everything else, it does kind of feed into that economic type thing, because that can be just the catalyst for all of these other things that are going on right here on this list. So, and I think somebody did mention in the comments too about medications and stuff. And the one guy was talking about in Alaska how he's seeing shortages. That's where what we were talking about earlier about how you can get all ramped up about all this stuff. You can listen to the numbers that the government's throwing out there to try to make you feel better, or the NASDAQ, or the stocks and bonds and all that stuff. But what really matters is right there at home. Like in Alaska, what he's seeing. What I'm seeing up here as far as inflation is completely different than the numbers they're throwing out in Washington. But those are the numbers that concern me, because they're affecting my ability to prepare. So I've seen not necessarily a whole lot of shortages. I mean, there are some shortages, more than there ever has been. But the inflation aspect of everything, it seems like it's just slowly going up, where it's not matching the numbers that, Washington is putting out, and the numbers I'm seeing here at home, they don't match up. So it's almost like I don't care what you say. That's not what I'm seeing.
Yeah. And that's the gig, right? Because the numbers that Washington puts out, it's like, it depends on who you're talking to. If you get it from the White House is comparing themselves to the height of inflation. So if was 8.5 somewhere in there, and it goes down to 8.3, you get told, yeah, we've reduced inflation. So you can never rely on what you're getting, because it's the system is so skewed now, right? So you have to rely with your eyes, and what are you seeing at the stores, and remember, during COVID, right? We did the largest upward transition of wealth in human history. It's that we can talk about trickle down economics. It ain't trickling down, right? That part ain't working. So we pumped all this money into the super wealthy. Well, and everybody struggled. Mostly, a lot of people struggled during it. They're losing their jobs, and different stuff was happening. Well, so you have all these people that burned through savings and everything, and now it's the recession. They're burning through their savings even more, but the the upper classes and all that, they have it. They got injected with a bunch of cash, so they can go buy all this stuff. So I think that in many of those cases, I don't even know that they really even know what's going on.
I think it's kind of like I think it's kind of like a business where the CEO and all the top brass and all that get all their reports and collate everything, get everything put together, and these are the numbers that affect the business. Whereas the people on the bottom working in the mailroom, working at wherever, those numbers are completely different than their reality in that business. And I think the people at top don't really care about the people on the bottom.
Well, I think where it matters though for preparedness is that I don't think Nancy Pelosi realized she was eating $20 or $30 a pint ice cream.
No,
right. And I don't think Joe Biden, when Joe Biden was in there and he was talking about, price of a steak when he was in the kitchen that one day or whatever it was, like they didn't know really what was going on. I think that's them being honest. They have no idea what it costs. So to them, they don't see the impact of this. It's part of the problem with Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., 4 of the 5 richest counties in the nation surround Washington, D.C. So what does that mean for preparedness? It means that you can only go by what you're seeing happen in front of you. And if we see the shortages that are going, and I don't see them getting better. I mean, hey, put down in the comments whether you think that the shortages are getting better or not, or they're getting worse. What do you see? Because I think they're getting worse.
I think the system's so fragile, it could get worse at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. Well, it's a just-in-time system, right? Like, and just in time, everything it's actually Lean Sigma 6. It's like this efficiency thing in the business world. Like you go get different like belts as you go through this course and they teach you how to fine tune everything and dial it in. So everything's running super efficient. The problem, what we've talked about, when everything runs super efficient, it's easy for it to get out of whack real quick. So I think we have to plan on the shortages because the economy's not getting better and we're heading an election. You have to plan on the civil unrest, the 9 attacks on the grid. You have to plan on that grid outage. We know the politics is still going to keep going. Like that was one of your things on the list, right? What is that feeding? Civil unrest, the economy, right? So I think when it comes to preparedness is got to focus on, I would focus on, like we talked about the other day, time, right? Set yourself up with having the ability to go, hey, I know I can last on my own, unaided for 7 days if you're new to this. Then 14 days, as much as you can get and still live comfortably. Start there and ratchet it up from there, because I think everything's sort of on the table right now. And I don't mean that to, be fearful, but it's so interwoven, right? It all kind of blossoms from it within itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it isn't, to some people from the outside looking in, it may seem like, preppers in general, not just this show, are, the doom and gloom type thing. But when you look at everything that's happening, look at everything that could happen, it just seems like there are, there are a number of different things that could happen. And like you were talking about with this poll, all of those kind of coincide together. Maybe nothing happens, maybe 1 or 2, but maybe 1 or 2 kick off 2 or 3 other things. And you got the people at top that just don't care, don't understand, or whatever, what we're dealing with down here. And I think that disconnect is a big part of where everything is going. And I think that's a global thing too. So really, you are left with the only thing you can do is just do exactly what you can do. Pay attention to this stuff. Do what you can do as far as preparedness while you can do it, using cash and all that stuff. And then just do what you can do. And they're going to, regardless of what we say, they're going to do what they continue to do. And they're going to continue to tear this machine apart, regardless of
I think
how
it
mad
gets
we
back
get about
to,
it.
I think it gets to the point where the only control that you have to be your own fallback, right? That's what this is. That's what preparedness is, right? You are your own fallback, right? So, and if you look at what's happening and everything that's possibly going on, it's interesting is I think when we used to talk preparedness, like on our shows, right, before 2020, maybe even before 2016, it was always, the disasters and the natural disasters and all that stuff. Well, a natural disaster will cause a lot of problems, but if you look at your list, nowhere on there is anything about a natural disaster, which if you would have asked that thing 5 years ago, that same question, you would have heard people talking super volcanoes. A lot of people grid down. That's a fair one to have with what's going on. But there would have been, the CMEs and all that. Now every one of those things is based upon what's currently happening. And, talk about the economy again. When the economy's good and everybody's happy, you're not worried. Like, you think about the 90s, there was political division and there was stuff, but it wasn't like anything that we're seeing now. Yeah. So what was the focus then? Like this, a lot bigger stuff. I mean, in the 90s, it was still like most of the survival stuff was about anti-government stuff or government overreach kind of thing. But, you look at it now, like there's not even the thought of, a natural disaster in that list in what's going on anymore.
Well, partly that's partly my fault because one, and you're right, kind of it's along the same lines as I didn't even think about it because I was thinking about these other things. But I also think that people on the Survivalist Prepper YouTube channel and this one are a little bit knowledgeable about stuff, about preparedness. So it's almost like that's the first thing you think about when you get into preparedness is that smaller stuff and you're already prepared for that stuff. And then you sort of graduate past that and you start thinking about all of these other things, all that stuff that is top of mind because of all the stuff you're hearing, especially with the inflation and everything going on. You go to the store and you see the high prices. You go to the store and you see the empty shelves. That stuff becomes more of a concern to you, rather than the basic stuff that, when this stuff wasn't going on.
Think about politics, man. If you think about it from being fearful that somebody, in the government, like that the government in general, let's say, is going to come after you at some point, right? You get two groups of people, right? You got people that are, or three groups, people that are pro-Trump, people that don't care about Trump, and people that are pro-Biden, right? And people that don't care about Biden. I guess that's the people that don't care about Trump or Biden in the middle. And what I mean is that kind of political, that's kind of where we're looking at. And all those groups can all have, if you're pro-Biden, the pro-Biden people can look at President Trump and say, that guy was going to do some crazy stuff that was going to land me, I was going to become a political prisoner. They truly believe that, right? A lot of people. And likewise, the pro-Trump people can say, oh yeah, Biden is doing it to us. And then the people in the middle say it, right? So I think right now it's really, everybody has somebody in their mind right now in politics in whether it's the presidents or whatever, that they can point to that, if they're in power, if that person's in power, oh my gosh, it's Germany time. It's 1930s Germany time or Russia time. So everybody has that fear when it comes down. And when you look at that stuff, it's like, oh yeah, I think it's fresh in just about everybody's mind.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something that the reason that I'm so concerned about all of this stuff anyway is because it's something that is immediate. It is something that I'm seeing it slowly, just gradually getting worse, even though all the talking heads can say what they want about it. Doesn't matter. What my eyes are seeing are telling me how I need to react to this stuff. And it's slowly getting worse. And it's something that in a week, in 2 weeks, could be that bad. And it's never really had that. I mean, I've always had the urgency, but it's never had this much urgency for me. And you see all the things going on around the world and here in the United States, and it's just like, oh man, here we go. So
here's the question then. So what do you do about it, right? Preparedness, man. What do you do about it?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. With everything that I'm doing, those are the reasons why.
No, for the average person out there, so someone says, okay, someone's listening right now, and they're like, all right, I agree. Whoever's listening, I agree that I think that the government might be trying at some point if not already there, like they're going to try to do stuff, right? Or that the economy is terrible, like all the stuff that we talk about on this list of, hey, this is what people are most worried about. What should people do about that? Like in general, like what would you tell them on this?
Well, and that's kind of what we've been talking about as well. Is you stated it earlier about preparing for weeks and stuff like that. Prepare for, just do something, basically. Just do something. And I think that's where, yes, you can be worried about all this stuff. You can be concerned about it, but at the same time, you got to be doing something. And I think that's what does, it's not a fear thing for me that motivates me. It's a seeing this stuff coming, and it's a not wanting to be in a situation where I have to try to figure out what I'm going to do about something. If I can be proactive about that and build up the food storage, the water storage, whatever it is in preparedness, if I can be proactive about that stuff and kind of ensure that when something like that does happen, because it sure seems like it's going to, that I'm able to either ride out that storm or have things as squared away as much as possible. So it all boils down to the fundamentals of preparedness, the basics of preparedness. Get that stuff ready. Do those things that you need to do, and that's physical fitness, that's food storage, water storage, all of those things, the basics of preparedness. Get that stuff figured out, and then work your way up with that. So somebody starting from scratch, yeah, I mean, food and water. I mean, food storage. Go, get that stuff figured out. But yeah, stuff we talk about all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I like you said, you can start with food and water and secure your home. Like, we talked about door armor. You can put that strip on your door that makes your front door a lot more stronger, right? Just something simple as that. It's $70. That really, makes it that'll make a big deal. It keeps your front door. It makes it harder for anybody to get in your house, right? That secures you. That helps secure your food and water. So I think those are all good places to start. And
yeah,
don't let it.
If you're just starting out, there's only about 1,000 different things you need to do. So just start doing it. Just start doing stuff. Whatever you can afford, whatever fits into your budget, your time frame, all that stuff. Just start doing stuff. And that's
and don't let all this stuff get to you, man. Try not to let it all get to you. Again, like we talked about before, the whys don't, even though we bring it up in here, the whys don't necessarily matter. Right. Yeah. It's what's happening right now. What do you think you're realistically, not just think? Because remember, when we think about a lot of the stuff that we're trying to figure out, well, what's going to happen, and we inject that fear into it, we're reacting more. We're not necessarily thinking it through. Objectively sit down and figure out, like, hey, what is the most likely thing that's going to cause me the biggest problem?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it, the economy? Maybe the byproduct of the economy is you lose the job, or the byproduct of the economy is you're on a fixed income and now you're like, oh, how do I afford all this stuff? What can you do? I mean, what are some aspects? I mean, I think, weren't you talking about doing something, Dale, on living back like it was in the Great Depression again or something?
Yeah. Yeah. We've actually got a video that we're going to be uploading talking about some lessons we can learn from the Great Depression. But it all boils down to some of those things that your grandparents did, all of the simple life type of stuff. That's the stuff that could be, beneficial coming in the next, months or years or anything like that. And things that people have just kind of lost that mentality. Wouldn't know what to do these days. Mm-hmm. So. One thing before we get out of here, I wanted to talk about a little bit, because we kind of mentioned it earlier, is why is it, do you think, that preppers are so apprehensive? There's some things in preparedness where we'll totally buy into it, right? And then there are some things that we're not playing the game, I suppose. I think of you've got the pandemic, you've got the masks, you've got the global warming and the climate change and all that stuff, where preppers seem to be more of the calling BS on everything, right? Because with me, I think, and we talked about this a little bit with Vision the other night, with me, it seems like when I'm told that I need to, like eating insects, I think that's what we were talking about. When I'm told that I'm going to have to eat insects, My mentality is, like hell I am. You're not going to dictate to me what I need to do and what I don't. But when it comes to the eating insects aspect of it, we've talked about it for years in preparedness, right? Joked about eating bugs and stuff like that, and eating bugs for survival and all of those things. So I guess it's the context. What is it about preppers, or maybe even just people in general that kind of get into preparedness, that are so apprehensive about the I guess the agendas or whatever it is with these people stating, all of these things, and then we're just not having any of it. What is your thought on that, as far as why some things we're okay with and some things we aren't?
I think, I think again, it goes back to, I think part of us, what wires us to prepare for disasters, right? And what do we do by its nature? We question things. We question that stuff more.
Distrust.
Right? Yeah, well, I think it goes back to the fear thing. We have a mistrust, right? We're always questioning stuff because we want to be safe, right? So, what if this happens? What if that happens? Well, when you can say, well, what if the earthquake happens? What if the fire happens? Eventually, if you ask enough what if questions, you're getting around to, what if somebody does something, right? Or what if somebody doesn't do something they're supposed to do, right? And so then I think you start going down that road of questioning authority more. And I think it's kind of, it's part of it's part of our wiring, and it's part of being free and independent and all the other stuff we want.
I think it also goes into why we are also interested in conspiracy theories, because the majority of preppers are interested in conspiracy theories. And we see, especially lately, that a lot of these conspiracy theories eventually come true, or we're being fed a certain narrative, and we know is BS. But and I think that's what I mean by the whole distrust thing, because we see time and time again these things coming true and us getting labeled as these crazy whack jobs, and then it turns out when the narrative gets flipped and everybody's okay with saying the stuff that we've been called whack job for 3 years, then so I think that distrust right there, the whole global warming thing, climate change thing, there's, people with agendas with that, people making money on that, different certain narratives. So there's that, what do you believe, what don't you believe type of aspect to all of it. So,
and you have, the mainstream, the accepted side of the house that suppresses things. And we see it, like you're being subjected to it. Right. So I think when there's enough stuff, and it's part of the preparedness community. So part of the deal with the preparedness community, and things have changed. We've talked about it, right? Like it's opened up a lot. It's mellowed out a lot. It's gone more sort of homestead 360-degree preparedness. Like, hey, it's not back in the 80s when I got into it. It was a survivalist movement. I didn't care for most of it. Right. I liked being prepared, but I didn't care for most of it. And I was looking up some stuff for that course I'm working on. And so a dude, Kurt Saxon, he's the guy who coined the term survivalism back in the 70s. And that dude, he was part of like every political party at times. Like he was always kind of moving around looking for his thing, including for a while part of the American Nazi Party. Right. And so I think you had, and the survivalist movement was very military oriented. It was like everybody wanted to be like this military, like very, it was very militaristic in how like the survival, how you looked at survival back then. Whereas it wasn't like it wasn't the whole, like it wasn't the homesteading thing, right? It was like, how did everybody could be Rambo kind of thing. That's what my take on it was when I first got into it. And it was very much, and this isn't some like, woke thing, but it was a very much a white thing.
Yeah, it
right?
was.
Like it was there. It wasn't. And, and so
it was exclusively a white thing.
so much so that I was looking it up, and I remembered this back when it happened. So I remember when Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma Federal Building, because I remember at the time, I'm like, oh, this is crazy. Because at the time, what they labeled him as was a survivalist. That's what his label was. Amongst all the things that they could pick for the guy, he was a right-wing survivalist. Right. And so I remember at the time going, oh man, they really don't like us. Right. And then, life took a turn. I was broke for a bunch of years, and when you're broke trying to prepare, it's like, so, that preparedness wasn't high on my list so much. And so when I got back into it, it was kind of like, I remember as Y2K hit, because it hit more of the news, like preparedness kind of expanded, right? Like, it's like more and more, okay, yeah. And so, and now it's like you go to like prepper camp in different places, and there's all kinds of different people hanging out.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of changed. So I think what happens is that the media back in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, Timothy McVeigh, again, through that survivalist thing, well, everybody that's into preparedness and not, just being one of the ones that has to go to the camp kind of thing. Right. Every one of those people is like a white Aryan, whatever, and they're still tapping into that. That's the same narrative that they're still pushing, even though that hasn't been around for 20 something, 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. It's completely different now. Even though, like back then, I think that narrative was pushed in that label, whether it was correct or not, of, that it was anti-government. That was basically the concern. That was it.
Well,
the government is we're going to be going to war with the government. That was the sentiment back then. And these days, there's so much more to preparedness than that.
Well, and part of the problem is, right, so in the 70s and 80s, you had that was going around. Well, then what happens in the early 90s? You had Ruby Ridge and you had Waco, right?
Yeah.
And that stuff happened on TV. And everybody knew what happened at Waco. That the local sheriff said, hey, I can go get these guys. I can go get David Koresh and get him out of here. And that next thing you know, the BATF goes and storms the place and they get shot up. Why was the BATF going there? Well, they got a bunch of weapons. Oh, weird that they used them on you that's what the problem was in the first place. Well, so everybody sees that, and then they see him burn the place down with women and children inside.
Yeah.
Right. Because guess what? They had the ability, they had prepared. They had the ability to, survive unassisted. And they did. And so they ended up burning the place down and killing a bunch of women and children. Then you go to Ruby Ridge and Randy Weaver and whatever, hey, at the end of the day, Randy Weaver broke the law, and you can argue about the law. He sawed off a shotgun. And yes, he was baited into it by the FBI. And then they shot. And then Lon Horiuchi shot Randy Weaver's wife while she was holding a baby, unarmed. Right. And so they gave us, now you had this thing where, like, look what they did. And, you had the Kennedy thing. And so the whole conspiracy side of the house only makes sense, especially on that stuff.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, we're not going to stop talking about conspiracies or stuff like that either. So, don't worry. This isn't good. We're not turning this into some sort of vanilla show. We still are, because I think all of that stuff is important, and I want to give and people want to hear our opinions on that stuff as well. And I think it is important to ask questions on that stuff. And it fascinates
it's the
me.
Why people wonder why preppers. You asked the question, why are preppies? Why are preppers conspiracy theorists?
Or apprehensive,
because you see this stuff, right? And it's like, and you flash forward to now, and people say, "Do you actually think your government would do that?" Hey,
how can you think they wouldn't?
Well, you could have the discussion. I think you could have the discussion that, would it be something like an organized effort? People might say, well, if you want to cut them some slack, say, okay, maybe it wouldn't be an organized effort, right? But at the same time, you can't deny that at least some segments of it go off the rails and have the ability to have a huge and impactful effect on somebody. Right.
Yeah.
And then you look at like what fuels us and all that, so I think, would it be crazy to think that like the IRS would target people, which was what? It targets your finances. How are you prepared for that?
Yeah. Well, you'd mentioned Blue Ridge and all that. You've got more recently, you've got the stuff that went on down in Australia. You've got the Canadian truckers. You've got all of these examples of the overreach and the examples of what they will do when they deem it necessary. So I think that plays into the fact that of us being that apprehensive of what we're being told and that conspiracy side of it, because we've seen it time and time again come out the way. Maybe it's not going to happen 100 times out of 100, but even if it only happens 5 times out of 100, that's what, as preppers, we want to be prepared for and be ready for. And that's what other people looking in think, that we look like we're out of our minds because we do that.
Well, you talk about Canada, right? And so you go to Canada where they cut people off from their bank accounts. And if you think that's fine, well, all right, well, that, that's one way to look at it. And think about if it happens to you. Remember, if you're pointing at Biden and saying that guy scares me, you're pointing at Trump, both sides are capable of that at some point. Right. Yeah. And I'm not saying it would be Trump or not saying it Biden, but 10 years down the road, once that stuff starts happening. So then what happens? Your preparedness should include what happens if I get cut off from my money that's in my bank account. Right. I mean, you can look at that and we could, talk about politics, and I put my debit card in and they don't let me get in touch with my money because the system shut me off. Or let's go back to the Great Depression and the run on banks. And you went there with your banking book. I want my money. We don't have any money to give you. It's the same, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you do if the money that you have stored somewhere is gone? You can't get, what's your backup plan to that? Obviously money or something else. Maybe that's having enough food on hand that I can figure it out.
Yeah. 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 All very interesting. I think, people look at preppers like we're out of our minds, but it's just a matter of perspective, right? I don't see it that way one bit. And I see people that are just willing to go with the flow, and willing to go with the narrative, the stated narrative, and life is easy if I don't have to pay attention to all this stuff. I tend to think of them as a little bit out of their mind. So, to each their own, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I think you're getting more people coming in and preparedness. I mean, look, we had Trent on last week and he was like, Hurricane Katrina did it. Every time we have something like that, someone becomes moves into the prepper community.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, man. So we're going to get out of here tonight. Everyone in the chat, appreciate you all joining in tonight. Everyone listening to the podcast, appreciate it. If you could like, subscribe, share, anything you can do to help the channel out, much appreciated. If you're looking for some long-term food storage, we've got it over at the shtfshop.com. And also selling some t-shirts over there, which I haven't been doing a lot with recently, but I am going to be jumping back on that. But anything you can do to help us grow the channel, help us grow the show would be appreciated. So with that, Brian, you have any closing thoughts or anything before we get out of here tonight?
No, man. Everybody have a great and safe week, and we will see you hopefully Wednesday morning on the Blabbercast.
Yep. All right, everyone. Take care and prepare. We'll talk to y'all later.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Survival Preppers. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to join us on YouTube for our weekly live shows. For more information or to connect with Duff and Dale, visit thesurvivalpreppers.com or thebugOutlocation.com for members-only content and prepping courses. See everyone next time.